We'll call our first work session together, the Clark County Clean Water Commission. And I wasn't being fastidious. This is such an important commission. I mean, as much as I love our Parks Commission, all the volunteer effort there, the Clean Water Commission does great work every day to help augment the work that the county does. And so I welcome this presentation. I look forward to it. I apologize that we don't have a full council here this morning because they all need to hear it. Although you had great participation in our LACMA symposium, and all of our counselors were present for that presentation. So anyway, why don't we go ahead and kick it off? Let's start with the introductions. Who's going to lead the discussion?
Good morning. I'm going to kick us off and introduce our guest here today. Good morning, Council. For the record, my name is Devin Rostifer, Clean Water Division Manager in Public Works. A little loud. Today, I am joined here by Ted Gaethje, who is the Chair of the Clean Water Commission. We want to thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an update on what the Clean Water Commission has been working on by going over some highlights from their 2023 annual report and 2024 work plan. And our goal to wrap up the work session today is really to provide Council with an opportunity to share what priorities you would like the Clean Water Commission to focus on in 2025. I will now hand it over to Ted to introduce himself and move us into the rest of the presentation. Ted?
Do I have my microphone on here? Okay. For the record, I'm Ted Gaethje. I'm currently the chair of the Clean Water Commission, which, as you know, is a 9-member volunteer organization that deals with clean water issues throughout the county. Just a little background, my interest in water quality and environmental issues goes back to my tenure with the Columbia Land Trust when I was on the Council of Stewards. I was chair of the Southwest Washington Watershed Alliance Group, and most recently with Friends of Vancouver Lake. I have a long interest in water quality issues throughout this region. I want to make sure we leave enough time for council members to ask questions, and if you want to interrupt either Devin or myself during our presentation, please do so. But I'm hoping we can carve out time at the end of the presentation so we can ask you to tell us what the Clean Water Commission should be doing in 2025, as well as any other questions that you might have. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the history of the Clean Water Commission, other than to say it was established back in 1999. And the ordinance itself is in need of an update, and that's something we're going to be bringing forward either at the end of this year or next year. I'm not sure when, but that ordinance does need an update to kind of reflect the current practices of the Commission. It was originally established to provide oversight of the clean water fee and make recommendations to Council on how funding is invested in the community. And it was more stormwater oriented, and it still is. But when I joined the board or the commission in 2022, a majority of the members then wanted to broaden our horizons and say, let's look at water quality throughout the county. Let's look at the watersheds in the county in a more specific way and not focus totally on stormwater, even though stormwater is a critical and important piece of that whole water quality concept. The commission is intended to try to maintain a balance of interest, to provide recommendations on stormwater management services, policies, and budgets, and to help create incentives for stormwater management while we evaluate the effectiveness of the programs that the county is currently administering. Our commissioners serve 3-year appointed terms, and the requirement is you have to live in Clark County, but you'll see in the upcoming slide here that there's geographic representation throughout the county in terms of who lives in what watershed. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read the mission and vision other than to say that it was well thought out, and I think it's something we, as the commission, believe is our our current mission and vision and have no intent of necessarily changing that. Our core values are stewardship, cooperation, and transparency. Next slide, please. This is our current makeup of the board, and as I mentioned, if you look at the geographic breakout there, you'll see there are people in the Lacamas watershed, Vancouver Lake, Lake River, West Slope, Lewis River, Salmon Creek, and Burbridge Creek. So we have a wide geographic distribution of membership. Yeah, next slide, please. I'd like to focus next on the Clean Water Commission's 2023 annual report. As you know, we present this annually. I've done so for a number of years. Next slide, please. One of the highlights of 2023 was, for the first time, the Clean Water Commission hosted a symposium, and this one centered on Lacamas Lake. And I want to give a special thank you to Chair Medvey, who gave opening remarks at the symposium, and we also appreciate your continued support in water quality efforts throughout the county. The Lacamas Symposium, I think, was a resounding success. We had over 100 participants. There were almost every agency at the local and state levels were represented at the meeting, at the symposium. There was a wide variety of presenters. They spoke on the science and data that's collected to inform long-term management decisions on what will happen with that body of water and the Lacamas watershed itself. And then it wrapped up with a discussion of policy implementation actions. Next slide, please. The outcomes were, well, one for one, the importance of establishing an interlocal agreement with the city of Camas. And I appreciate the council moving forward with that. And that interlocal is now in place. There's been improved coordination between agencies on dealing with that body of water, and that's critical for not only Lacamas Lake and the other lakes in that region, but as we'll discuss in a few upcoming slides, Vancouver Lake as well, the kind of partnership that's necessary to move forward on water quality improvements. Camas and county staff are working on a shared public participation plan, including strategizing about future legislative priorities and funding, as well as preparing for new, hopefully, grants that will help implement the planning on Lacamas Lake. Next slide, please. Several of our Clean Water Commission members either term limited or chose not to reapply for terms, and so we had several vacancies, and our Clean Water staff made a significant outreach effort and contacted over 20 community organizations and others to improve and increase the diversity on our body. And I think they were very successful in that effort. We have 5 new members. I think the next slide illustrates that. Oh, I guess not. In any event, let me just say that there's diversity in gender and diversity in people's backgrounds, and I would give a big shout out to the Clean Water staff for making a concerted effort to change the diversity of the commission itself. We have another round of applications that we'll be looking at the end of this year, and we expect to have 3 new members on the commission in 2025. Next slide, please. Other accomplishments in 2023 involved letters of support. The commission wrote in behalf of several projects. I think 2 of those 3 are hopefully will be funded. And then overall, I guess there is a revitalized energy and interest on the part of commission members, and I have to say that part of that has to do with Devin, who now has been in your employment for over a year and brought great energy and insight, and I think a high level of expertise to her job, and that has certainly energized the commission as well, and I compliment you on your selection of Devin as the Clean Water Division Manager. Next slide, please. And I also want to give a shout out to Alice Millward, who's been, I don't know how many years you've been doing this, Alice, but I know it's been a number of years, and you've been a strong and vital support for the Clean Water Commission. Next slide. I'd like to transition now to the Commission's 2024 work plan, what we've been focused on in this year. Next slide. Every year that the Commission updates its work plan in December, and we set an agenda then for the coming year. For 2024, our focus has been on supporting the Clean Water Division's rate study and focusing on Vancouver Lake with the overarching goal to incorporate environmental justice and watershed health benefits into all that the Commission does. Next slide, please. With the rate study, the Clean Water Division has been regularly bringing updates to the Commission on the same timeline as the Council. So, for example, we had a rate study kickoff, and we completed a Commission survey on what clean water policies were most important to us. Then following up in June, we learned about the mandated, the recommended, and the additional service gaps. And then finally, this month, we were presented with the final funding gap and the revenue assumptions along with the draft stormwater rates for 2025. Next slide, please. And you may recall that back in April of this year, the Clean Water Commission wrote a letter of support for the rate study. We explained our priorities for the next 5 years of clean water services, and this included supporting the Clean Water Division to move beyond implementing only the mandated regulatory services to make progress on holistic water quality and to achieve system-wide improvements to watershed health. We supported increased investments in inspection, operations of infrastructure, including proactive asset management of pipes and long-term capital planning. And we see an increased need for more resources and assistance throughout the development, construction, and building process, and that means more interaction between the Clean Water Division and the Planning and Development Departments, as well as more resources, obviously, for lake management, since we're in the planning processes for 2 lakes right now, and for monitoring and increasing educational outreach and technical assistance. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through the community listening steps, final work session, rate adoption. You already know the schedule, but it has been moved forward, obviously, to get more public input. That's a good thing, and you'll finally make your final decision on the October 1 rate hearing. The next set of slides deal with the Council Commission tour of stormwater facilities that was done, I think, on July 30th. I had a previously scheduled vacation, so I was not present. I wish I had been, but I was elsewhere. I'll let Devin take over the description of that event.
Great. Thank you, Ted. And thank you to all of the councilors and commissioners who joined us on our July bus tour. The next set of slides just shows some of the highlights. We visited Public Works Operations Center out at 78th Street and got a chance to see all the street sweepers. I think at one point we had Councilor Belcott and Councilor Young riding around as street sweepers. We also had a chance to show off our new pipe crawler, which I've been affectionately calling Piper. And we were able to visualize real time the information that comes from moving that pipe crawler through a pipe. Next slide, please. Here's some photos of the street sweeper rides. You can just keep moving through these, Michelle, thank you. We had a chance also to get next to the creek and see what it looks like to collect data out in the field. And I think what we heard from both the commission and councilors was a big impression that team made on how much data they collect and how physical that work is. We also had a chance, you might like this, Chair Medvegy, that image up there, what you're seeing is a phosphorus cartridge. So that's called Phosphasorb, and those cartridges help remove phosphorus from stormwater. And so we got a chance to see what those look like, as well as the picture in the middle shows an underground vault where there are hundreds of those cartridges. So we really wanted a chance to highlight the traditional stormwater infrastructure you might see, but also some of the things you don't see underground. So here's a photo of everyone who attended. I know we had our prosecuting attorney there. We had representation from April Firth, the Director of Community Development. Jordan Bogie was able to join us, as well as Public Works, Business Services. Our budget manager, Amanda Scott, and Sherry Villafan were also there. So great representation from county leadership, also from the council. Thank you again to Councilor Belcott and Young for spending 8 hours with us. It was a long day. And also, I believe we had 5 commissioners that were able to join us. So we were really proud of this and hope that we can continue to do these types of tours in the future, especially as we have new commissioners and potentially new councilors down the road. I'm going to hand it back to you, Ted.
Okay, thank you, Devin. I think we're going to wrap up our discussion here by talking about a topic that is near and dear to me, and that's Vancouver Lake, particularly through my work with the Friends of Vancouver Lake nonprofit. Earlier this year, the Clean Water Division engaged Friends of Vancouver Lake on development of a scope of work to implement the legislative proviso that Friends of Vancouver Lake was instrumental in requesting and securing from the state legislature for work on the lake itself. And I want to thank the council on behalf of Friends of Vancouver Lake and the commission for taking on this important responsibility. And just to give you a little background, there have been two provisos at the legislative level for the lake planning process. The first one was $150,000. It was approved in 2021, and then most recently $330,000 for the next 2 years. So a total of almost $500,000 from the state legislature to do in-depth studying of Vancouver Lake for a complete and comprehensive lake management plan. The first plan was adopted and approved by the council late last year. Second plan is in the works now and will be finished in 2025. Progress on that lake management plan to date has been a re-engagement of what we call the Technical Advisory Committee, which is a group of almost 40 people from different local and state agencies and watershed groups. First meeting was held on June 12th, which focused on developing a beach management plan, the first of its kind ever done on Vancouver Lake, which was carried out, in July?
Treatment was implemented in July.
In July. And I guess the outcomes we think are good. I don't think we have a complete report yet on how it's worked, but it's the first time that's been attempted, and we hope it's successful and think it will be successful. The next meeting, September 18th, is going to be revolving around a discussion of long-term engineering, what can be done to improve the flow of water into the lake, which is the primary problem, is that we have a lake that is sort of a bathtub effect between Lake River and the Flushing Channel, and we're not getting the flow of water that's necessary to move that water through the lake and, in a way, cleanse it. And that's going to be the major discussion at September 18th meeting. Complete engineering work that's being done by a sub-consultant to the consultant that you all selected. See, we've covered the lake treatment, so I guess next slide. Oh, yes, and here at the end of the first part of October, we will be doing exactly what we did with Lacamas Lake last year. We're going to do a symposium on Vancouver Lake. And I think that's going to be sort of the capstone of the year of Vancouver Lake, as Devin called it. We're going to replicate what we did in 2023 at Lacamas Lake by hosting all the agencies that we can invite, and hopefully we'll have a participation in at least 100 people, if not more. And the outcomes we hope will be the same as Lacamas Lake, that we'll come up with a plan of action, a coordination of efforts of public agencies, and a path forward that will dovetail with the completion of the Lake Management Plan in 2025. Remainder of 2024, we talked about the rate study and support. We'll be looking at the 6-year capital plan. We'll be looking at the budget review for the Clean Water Division, the Stormwater Management Plan, the Clean Water Commission work plan, and getting with the 4-year biennium from 2025 to 2029, new permit requirements as well. I'm not going to get into the meetings. We have meetings every other month. They speak for themselves. That's our 2025 agenda as well. And just because we're on public airwaves here, I would say that these meetings are open to the public, and we encourage people to attend and hear what we are doing. We want to exhibit as much transparency in this commission as we possibly can. Our 2025 recommendations to the council are the following. We highly recommend and request that the council support a rate increase of the clean water fee that will help the Clean Water Division move beyond implementing mandated services only. This is really long overdue. The division's been operating with limited resources for many, many years. And in order to make the bold changes that are needed to improve water quality, we think it's essential to increase rates to a level that will enable the Clean Water Division to build its capacity, its resources, and its expertise to implement more work throughout the county beyond just permit requirements under the Clean Water Act, while restoring important natural areas and addressing issues with aging infrastructure. Second, we hope the council will continue its focus on investments that will reduce nutrient loading from the watersheds. These activities are absolutely essential to solve water quality issues in Vancouver and Clackamas Lake and require more investments in stormwater management facilities, phosphorus removal technologies, and other matters. It requires us to work with the Conservation District to address agricultural issues as well as septic issues. And septic tanks are high on our list of concerns. There's currently a program aptly named Smart Poop, I believe. Is that it?
Poop Smart.
Poop Smart. I got it backwards.
Smart Poop.
While it's sort of, it doesn't involve a lot of funding, it has some very important principles attached to it, which is outreach to people with septic systems to talk about ones that are failing and how they can be repaired. There are programs at the state level that would provide some level of funding for no-interest loans and other means of helping people whose septic systems simply aren't functioning properly. But the important thing is that inspections need to be done. And I'm just going to cite one statistic here that we got from the Clark Conservation District, who's implementing much of the Poop Smart program. As of June 2023, 31%, which is approximately 11,000 of all of the county septic systems, of which there are approximately 35,000, were past due for regular inspections. Some of these uninspected systems are leaking raw human waste into local waterways. Microbial source tracking, which is a DNA-level testing method, tested in multiple areas of the county and found the presence of human fecal bacteria and optical brighteners. I bring up this statistic only because it's illustrative of really what needs to be done or what more needs to be done to ensure that these systems are working properly, because they are a significant source of contamination in our watersheds throughout the county. And this is a more detailed effort will be forthcoming from the Commission this year in terms of septic systems and recommendations that we'll make to you all. And then last, I guess, the annual work plan collaboration. We're hoping that our Commission can be more involved and more collaborative with the Planning Commission, the Commission that advises planning and building, the Climate Advisory Group, and other county advisory boards. We don't want to be in a silo. We feel like we should be interacting in some way, in some form or fashion with these other boards as well, so they know what we're doing and we know what they're doing. And I think with that, I am out of slides and done, and would like to engage with the council on any questions you have or any recommendations you have for our work in 2025.
So let me start. Thank you so much for not only your personal dedication all these years to these issues, but the work you're currently doing. All great work. So kind of circling back to how I started this, I'm very appreciative of everything you're doing. And, you know, from the provisos and the family connections, you know, Sharon Wiley was a real force behind these provisos. I would just tell you, first and foremost, you know, once you had introduced and said, hey, we're going to look for council's priorities at the end of this, and I started taking down notes. And then your recommendations for 2025 are pretty much my notes. I mean, so I don't want to double tap or restate what you've just said, but I quite frankly, what you've just concluded with have been my priorities and remain my priorities. So forgive me if I repeat some of them. So let me just go through some of the points I wanted to ask about and also make. So I look forward to, as you said, the results of these chemical treatments of our algae blooms. For me, the most important part of this, and this is just from my foxhole, not necessarily collectively shared. And Vancouver Lake is so different than Lacamas Lake. I mean, I have never been in favor of chemical treatments over natural treatments. Like for Vancouver Lake, we need to improve the water flow. We need dredging. We need that cleansing action between the river, connecting the watershed up, and get back to more of a natural flow that started with the Bonneville Dam disrupting all of that ability to flush that lake. Very different than Lacamas Lake, which I have always pushed, and I really still see as a long-term solution the introduction of oxygen into that watershed and ultimately into that lake. You know, it's not going to help Vancouver Lake. It's just too shallow and broad, and it's not the issue. But when we first were about to, for this summer, about to say, hey, we're going to warn about the algae bloom in Lacamas Lake. My first call, and I copied Devin on some of the email traffic, was to Camas, okay, when are we doing the chemical treatment? Radio silence, basically, well, the timing is not right. I'm like, okay, this an algae bloom, this is the time it was designed for. So ultimately, it occurred. We were, I think, a little bit more proactive with Vancouver Lake, but now, okay, did it work? I see it as a short-term solution. Hopefully, it'll have some long-term impacts, but I'm not that hopeful for it. But so I look forward to those reports soon to see if it was worth the money, because we have precious few dollars to spend. We need to make sure it's effective. So think nanobubbles for Lacamas Lake, and let's keep pressing forward on the actual restoration of Lake Vancouver as far as getting that water flow back to where it could be. Septic systems, you know, I've always had effective systems. When I first came up here, I was like, boy, the enforcement system's a lot different up here than what I was used to in Northern California. And, I mean, I had one comment, I was getting my water tested, and I just started talking to the staff there about, well, it seems a little backward that we wait for a septic system to fail before we really get involved in it. And the guy behind me said, oh, don't worry, you know, you can get a purification system for your well. And I'm thinking, yeah, but failed septic system impacts the watershed, the aquifer, a broader region. So you're going to have 100-point filters. But it turned out he was a filter guy. I mean, that was his business, so it was a good plan. Columbiana was pressing pretty much the same statistics you just had years ago when I first became a counselor, or before I became a counselor. that compliance with inspections and operation and maintenance of septic systems of residences was pretty poor. I don't know that we've improved much. So it is an important aspect. And I know that we have support we had a legislative session, and there was a lot of interest in connecting those on septic systems to sewers that can. Sue and I were at the Water District, and that was pretty much the first time I heard we had over 1,000 homes that could be connected to sewer that weren't, and within the city of Vancouver, within the county. So I know our local legislative delegation is very interested in having more support by the state to getting those hookups accomplished. It's all important. The educational piece, you know, from phosphate loading, and by the way, each of those filters is about $100 a pop, and we're going to have to buy a lot of them if we're going to step up our phosphate reduction in our stormwater facilities. It's going to take rate increases. We know that. So I'm hoping that proselytize the council to favorably consider what was requested by Devin and team. But we need to, when we were first looking at the interlocal agreement with Camas, one of the first discussion points was phosphate loading from all the nutrients. And people are good people. They want to have green lawns, and they really don't know that they're over-fertilizing. But we have problem with manure management in this county too, you know, and it's getting the word out from the Conservation District. It's more than just the Poop Smart program, but we need to collaboratively push all of these initiatives to educate people not to over-fertilize, to get our farmers, our agriculture, all those domestic horse folks to properly compost and manage their manure. It all gets into our watershed. So I'm kind of hitting the high points of things I've been pushing on ever since I've been here. The other aspect is our aquifer, our water usage. There is this prevailing view of, hey, my well's never gone dry, so I can use as much water as I want. And it gets wasted. I mean, it's anathema to me. I mean, I grew up in the next generation from those that survived World War II and the Great Depression, and, you know, they kind of were the progenitors of reuse, recycle, reduce. And here, people just waste water. It lowers our aquifer, it lowers our stream levels, and that becomes additive to additional heat and lack of canopy. And so it's killing fish, the overuse of water. I was talking to Steve Manilow, who's, I think, a resident state expert on aquifers amongst Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board expertise. You know, he was very concerned, too, with all the wells we have, that there's no control or education on its limited use. Even when the governor declared a statewide drought, people were still wasting water. We need to do something about that. And that may take a legislative fix to some extent, and I know people out in the rural community are going to start screaming about that, but it's all important for our water health. And let me just skim, see if there's anything else. One thought popped into my mind when you had the slide about recruitment and building your own membership. I like reserve teams. I like the ride-along program. In the law enforcement context, I was thinking, wow, why don't you guys do that? I mean, you had a bus tour for the council and others. If you can get a civilian interest, a lot of volunteers out there are looking for, where can I volunteer? You know, get a ride-along program. Get them more engaged in what you do. It's a part of the education process, and go down as deeply as you can. I mean, like Columbia Springs and our youth, you know, educating them on our ecosystem that we all live with. I think it's an opportunity for recruitment, but also for the educational goals that you have. With that, I think I've expended all of what I see as my top issues that you could help us with. The collaboration is probably first and foremost, and secondly, just keep doing what you're doing because it's great. I look forward to the Vancouver symposium. Sue, did you have some comments or questions? And then Karen?
Thank you. Yeah, you pretty much covered the entire watershed in the county, so I'll try and add to what you said. But I agree with everything that you said. And really, I want to thank you and the work that you've done. I had the opportunity to serve on the Clean Water Commission some years ago, and you're in a more proactive stance, and it's admirable because you're all volunteers, so you're going above and beyond, and it's really appreciated. I think the Lacamas Lake Forum, wildly successful, and that collaboration takes time and effort, and it fostered a good deal of collaboration, so thank you very much for that. And I'm happy to see that you're going to do one for Vancouver Lake, and I see it also includes Burnt Bridge Creek, which is a very large watershed itself, so I hope Burnt Bridge Creek doesn't get lost in the focus on Vancouver Lake. There's, I think, some particular issues related to Burnt Bridge Creek. We've heard from some in the community about homeless encampments and concern about that. So there's a lot more complicating issues, I think, in Burnt Bridge. It's all complicated, but particularly related to that. We did have a presentation from the Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board. I think that was just last week, but it might be of interest because it's looking at the watersheds in the county more from the fish recovery angle, which I think is very complementary to the work that you're doing. I also am very interested in the outcomes from that algae treatment, so we'll stay tuned for that. And related to the septic, because I think that is very much on our radar, and I believe there's some legislation, I think it may be Representative Wiley that is working on to provide some resources to speed up that process to get connections to the septic. So I'm just anticipating the council will be supportive of that. And then we did receive some information about some shared septic systems because I think there are some issues with compliance related to the shared septic systems. So I think that might be also something to look at. And then as far as just to add maybe a little bit different angle on some of the things that I think are important. You know, what I see, I'm in I think it's the West Slope, some of the smaller streams, Whipple Creek, G Creek, and, you know, living on the edge of the growth boundary, you know, there's just been so much development. So construction stormwater is a concern of mine. And some of these smaller streams that are still salmon bearing, the impact can be very significant. So I think this monitoring and enforcement related to construction stormwater is important for those small streams. And then I guess also related to the septic, I know there's shared jurisdictions and responsibilities. So whatever recommendations you have related to that, because I think the health department plays a role, the conservation district, they've been fortunate to get some grants. I hope the grants hold up because the work they're doing is really important, and then what the county can do as well. And I did just last week receive an email from one of my more thoughtful constituents about beavers and how the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin have been reintroducing beavers as a way to manage hydrologic function. So I haven't, I'll share that information with you, and because maybe there's a part of that natural function that can be reinstituted. So again, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Karen?
Yes,
Councilor Bentley? Please.
I have a couple of comments and then questions. Um, the comments are in looking at the recommendations for 2025. Maybe we should have an expansion on that first bullet so that we aren't just moving beyond the mandated services, but really emphasizing excellence in the mandated services and then moving beyond. And I would suspect that's what you had in mind, but I'd frankly like to see that stated. And then secondly, I'd like to just compliment you on your emphasis on collaboration with public health and other entities, because that really does expand your impact. And I think that is just terrific. So keeping that as really half of your recommendations for 2025, I think is quite good. My questions involve, I guess, primarily the algicides. In a smaller body of water, and I don't know about in Lacamas Lake and Vancouver Lake, algicides are often copper-based compounds. And I don't know if that is the case or not. I'd like some understanding of that and the impacts of that, if in fact it is the case. And then algae bloom death can, of course, contaminate the water with toxins. And I'm interested in how you deal with that, since it's kind of a twofold process. So that's one set of questions on the algicides. And then the other area where I'd like some more understanding is on aeration. How can that be increased from the level that we have right now? And particularly in those shallow bodies of water, how can the aeration be increased beyond where it is? Because that is so important in cutting down on some of the growth. That's all my questions.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to provide a quick response. Regarding the treatment in Vancouver Lake, it is a peroxide-based treatment. It's called phycomycin, and so it does not contain copper. The byproduct from the algicide working just naturally degrades into water and oxygen. And regarding Utrisorb, the utilization of that in Lacamas Lake, I will have to get back to you on the exact chemical composition. Unfortunately, I just haven't been as involved. That treatment's been led by the city of Camas. But what I will tell you is that we have a meeting with Camas tomorrow to talk about next steps and whether or not they want to consider trying the peroxide treatment that we're using in Vancouver Lake, or potentially doing a sediment treatment when they draw down the lake later this fall, so that they can inspect the dam. What I can say is that public health is seeing improvements in Lacamas Lake. Yesterday they verbally confirmed that areas where they normally see blooms in Lacamas during this time of year, they're seeing the bloom go away. So we're really excited to hear that promising information from Lacamas, and I'll make sure to follow up with a written, more comprehensive results for council. We recently installed an algae tracker in Vancouver Lake, so we're getting real-time, minute-by-minute information on algae in Vancouver Lake, which has been very fascinating. One of our challenges in Vancouver Lake, however, though, is our original plan involved deploying a containment boom to help containerize the treatment, increase its effectiveness. But unfortunately, in order to do that, we have to go through shoreline permitting, and so we were not expecting that for a boom in the water, and so we're working through and kind of shifting our focus so that we can get that boom installed next year. We saw some temporary we did measure that algae death. There was a slight decrease in microcystin, but unfortunately, because of the wind patterns, the bloom moves around, and without that boom to containerize the treatment, we don't think that it will be as effective. But what we do know now from the information this year is that a boom is necessary to increase the effectiveness of treatment in Vancouver Lake. But I will follow up with more information in writing for you.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that the ability to do short-term treatments for the beach area could also extend to the rowing lanes of the lake, so that events such as the one we had back in May that attracted something like 1,500 rowers and 3,000 people attending wouldn't be abruptly canceled as several have been over the previous years. Short-term treatment of the growing lanes could ensure that those events will go on unimpeded. And as Devin has mentioned, the half-life of those chemicals is very short, sometimes less than 24 hours or 12 hours. So we used Priscillacor to treat the Eurasian milfoil back in 2021, and that, again, was very effective. It was very benign, and the lake could be utilized for recreation purposes within a day of the treatment. So the science is out there to make this happen, but you don't want to. It's like putting a Band-Aid. You know, the Band-Aid is the treatment, the lake treatment, and the real long-term thing is how to improve water quality. As Councillor Medavia said, there's got to be a long-term plan. And I would also mention collaboration, Councilmember Bowerman. Collaboration means something greater than just within Clark County. It means collaboration with the Port of Vancouver, the City of Vancouver, and others dealing with Vancouver Lake. It's not Clark County's responsibility alone. It's a shared responsibility for everyone who is involved with the lake.
Thank you. That's very informative. And then if you could turn to aeration as a question area, particularly in those shallow areas that we deal with.
Regarding air, I can speak to in shallow areas that I would refer to Vancouver Lake. Lacamas Lake is much deeper. Aeration was studied in, I'm going to start with Lacamas Lake because we know a bit more about aeration in regards to Lacamas Lake management. Aeration is often used to help increase oxygen in the lower portions of a lake to help reduce phosphorus from being released from sediment. And in Lacamas Lake, what they determined is that most of the nutrient loading was coming from Lacamas Creek, 80% of which is the county's, and less of the phosphorus load was coming from the sediments. And therefore, long-term solution they felt was treating the water column and focusing on reducing nutrient loading from the watershed before focusing on treating the sediments. It was studied, and it could be an effective tool to addressing sediment sources of nutrients. However, sediment sources of nutrients are not the largest nutrient contributor to Lacamas Lake. So it was not recommended as a phase 1. Could it be a phase 2 or phase 3? Most definitely. It is not off the table. Regarding Vancouver Lake, we don't know enough about the wind dynamics and the sediment resuspension from the wind. Since it is shallow, we believe that the bottom of the lake is mixing more with the water column. Therefore, part of our engineering analysis and modeling that we're doing is to learn more about those patterns to determine other options for treatment. That's why we've been focused on the beach rather than the whole lake, and that's also why we haven't focused on sediment treatments, because we just don't know how that sediment is moving around, but we hope to know more after this initial phase. To answer your question, we don't know a lot about the effectiveness of aeration in Vancouver Lake. In Lacamas, it was considered, but only for addressing nutrients coming from the sediment.
There is still much to learn, isn't there? It's amazing.
So much to learn. Yeah, like I'm going to quote, I think it was Councillor Marshall, you said it's just all so complicated, but really rewarding to be working on these things.
Karen, does that conclude your questions?
It does, thank you.
So I don't want this to sound like a counterpoint, but this is also an ask to you guys as a commission, because I think we need a further look. Just focusing right now on Lacamas Lake, There were only a few of, like Lacamas Creek. Not all the water inflow was tested. And the possibility does exist with some of the dairy farms locally, some of the new housing developments. And boy, it's been an explosion around Lacamas Lake and Camas. Hundreds and hundreds of homes have been added. That inflow from those sources were not tested. Yeah, I think it's a given that the muck at the bottom of Lacamas Lake is heavily laden with phosphate. And short of dredging it all out, it needs to be addressed. But the long-term solution of stemming the flow of that new nitrogen and phosphate coming into the lake from all sources is going to be important. And so the consultant that was hired and the county itself has limited ability to have tested all of those stream flows, large and small. And if you have a low volume stream, but heavily concentrated in phosphates and nitrogen, it may be as bad as Lacamas Creek. We really don't know. That's an open question. So I'm still in favor of introducing oxygen into that lake because I think it would really benefit all of these issues. And it could be at the source near Lacamas Creek flow in because they do diffuse, especially the nanobubbles. As far as Lake Vancouver, I think it's pretty clear. You know, the Corps did dredging, and most of the tailings went on Vancouver Island, and none of it was stabilized. It all sloughed back in. And then from the Columbia River flow to Lake River to the creeks, losing their connectivity over the decades, the water level at the bottom is uneven. It doesn't promote the flow, the flushing channel, the restriction on the flushing channel. I think all of these things are pretty well known. The issue is who pays for it and how does it get cleaned up. You know, the EPA is weighing in. Ultimately, hopefully they'll provide some direction to the Corps of Engineers and some grants. It is a big issue that chemicals necessarily won't fix. So those are just my overarching thoughts in light of some of the additional questions and comments that were made. It is a long-term haul. And it goes beyond this particular council to the next council to the next council. We have to put in place this lake management plan for our lakes that will bring in all of the stakeholders. I think, you know, the Port of Vancouver is cooperative, but are they taking a lead on the entirety of it? No, we all own part of it, and between ecology and DNR and the city and the county, we all have an interest and underlapping roles. So a lake management plan with all those stakeholders is the way ahead to ensure that we do the long-term planning and long-term investment that's going to be needed here. So remaining comments or questions before we just say thanks and move on? Sue, go ahead.
Just very quickly, I was so disappointed I wasn't able to go on the tour, so I do hope there's another one in the future. Thanks.
Okay, hearing nothing further, thank you so much for everything you do every day and for what you will be doing. We look forward to the testing to see if we were effective in those short-term treatments and if it is a value for the money being spent from those provisos. And let's keep those provisos coming.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank
so
you to Commissioner Gaethke. He's a real asset to have on our team.
Thank you, Councilor.
okay, so we're going to go ahead and close out this work session. The next one is the Carp County Opioid Abatement Council update.